Hello and welcome to the Leaders in Supply Chain podcast. I am your host, Radu Palamariu, Managing Director of Elcott Global. Our mission is to connect the supply chain ecosystem by bringing forward the most interesting leaders in the industry. And it is my pleasure to have with us today Christopher Logan. He is currently a Managing Director at Accenture and leads the freight and logistics practice across growth markets, Asia Pacific, Middle East and Africa, as well as Latin America. He is collaborating with clients and with fellow Accenture consultants to drive innovation and digitalization in freight and logistics businesses as the industry undergoes a once-in-a-generation transformation. Across his 25 years plus career, he has worked on global logistics and transport businesses, strategy consulting, global trade, emerging markets, as well as exploration and mining companies. He is an active participant in the World Economic Forum activities and was also selected as a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader in 2008. Christopher, thanks a lot for making the time and a real pleasure to have you with us today.
Radu, it's a pleasure to be here and thanks for having me.
And I want to start with the hot topic of everybody's lives pretty much in the current situation, which is COVID-19 and the current crisis that we are experiencing, and obviously its impact on supply chains. So maybe let's start with what's your view on where we are today, how we got here, and also what's next.
Excellent. Today is a really interesting time to be in the logistics industry because the industry was probably one of the first to be impacted by COVID-19. As many of your listeners would know, the impact started all the way back in January as Hubei province in China entered a full lockdown. And as the world's largest production economy and the largest logistics network, it basically ground to a halt during Chinese New Year and for several weeks thereafter. Then the logistics companies in China and those international firms working in China had to work heroically to restart an entire country's logistics supply chain system. And ultimately, they got the system back up to 70 or 90% capacity in early March, which was a phenomenal achievement. And for a time, people thought, well, that might be the worst of it from a logistics point of view. However, in mid to late March, COVID-19 went global and logistics challenges also hit global. So we've had capacity constraints everywhere around the world, although not as acute as they were in China, but they were in pretty much every major industrialized country in the world. And the logistics companies then had to pivot and continue to work heroically, but all over the world to keep freight moving despite these challenges. And also, as you know, right about that time, the working from home became the norm for almost everybody, except for those people who are physically handling the freight. And that's still where we are today. There is a third wave that is just beginning and is going to last for quite a long time, unfortunately. And this is around the demand shocks that are going through the global economy right now. You've got the lockdowns, which are limiting consumer demand and industrial demand all over the world. And that is likely to continue to be lower than normal even after the lockdowns get lifted, although we don't know exactly when that's going to be or how long those the lower economic activity is going to last. That lower freight revenue or freight volume and freight revenue is going to put even more pressure on logistics companies over the next 6, 12, 18 months. So there's a lot of negative going on in the logistics business that we're having to deal with. But despite all the chaos, there have been a few positive bits of news for logistics providers. Home delivery and last mile logistics are seeing huge growth, and we can talk a little bit more about that. And there are a few customer segments that have seen large growth, like grocery and emergency air freight for medical supplies. So there's a lot of transition, and in that context, I think companies have got a lot of challenges of what do you do now to deal with these things, and then what do you do next to make sure you're prepared for what's going to happen in the future.
I wanted to actually dig a little bit deeper because indeed it's It's literally unprecedented what we are experiencing. We've never seen such a crisis in our lifetime, with the shock in supply and now in demand in such a short period of time, right? So it's, I mean, we've seen other crises, but it hasn't been as abrupt to leading to half the world population being in lockdown and the consequences of, you know, demand that drop that generated from that. How, as a logistics company, or what would be the priorities that you would advise your clients from logistics, from freight forwarding and so on, to focus on during this time where most likely they will suffer cash flow issues, they will suffer client demand issues? What should they look at and focus on to make sure that the business maintains a certain level of continuity and is emerges out of this in a good shape? I don't know if good shape is the right word, but emerges out of this crisis well.
That's a great question. And I think you're exactly right. They need to focus on what do you do now to keep the business viable? And then what do you do next to respond to the bigger changes and position yourself for the future? So in terms of what to do now, most of the logistics companies, certainly the larger ones, are already on top of this. And there's really four big elements. The first one is to create a response center and to have your business continuity plans and to be able to execute those in a coordinated way, either centrally or decentralized, but under very specific guidance from a single plan. So that's point number one. Point number two is all these companies need to implement widespread measures to ensure the safety of your frontline workers. So even as some logistics companies are not directly touching the freight, many of them are, and many of them are still out in the general public. There are deemed essential services pretty much everywhere around the world. And so the safety of your frontline workers has to be your top priority. The third area that's important for the people who are not on the front line, but the people who've got the capability to work from home, is you need to provide a set of capabilities and norms to allow them to be productive working from home, because this is absolutely essential to keeping your business moving. And then the last thing, which is probably the end result of those three plus a little bit more, is you need to ensure that the freight keeps moving. There are huge challenges with air freight capacity and ocean freight capacity in different ways, and we can talk more about that in a few minutes. But number one, you need to keep the freight moving, because what you do as a logistics company and what you do as the employee of a logistics company really matters, because you're the ones who are getting goods on the shelves for the rest of the world. And you are an essential service, and you need to keep working heroically to keep all of the rest of us able to continue our lives.
Mm. And wanted to also linking it back to the areas where it grew, and you mentioned e-commerce, you mentioned deliveries, you mentioned this type of pockets, specifically linked to obviously people being at home and ordering stuff online, groceries and essentials. I was reading even today a very good initiative in Singapore itself, where the taxi company, ComfortDelGro is a taxi company here in Singapore, will be doing grocery deliveries together with e-commerce, online e-commerce supermarket. This type of activities are happening in other parts of the world, USA and so on. How do you see this? Maybe let's also focus on the positive, and how some of these companies have paired up, have done last mile together, some of the creative ideas that have come out of that from your clients as well, and maybe you can share some case studies.
That's an excellent case study. And as you said, that's also going on in many other parts of the world. So the trend is interesting, because e-commerce and grocery delivery in particular are growing enormously right now, because a large percentage of people are working from home and have got some restrictions on their mobility even beyond that. So those are trends that we had seen over the last 5 to 10 years, but they've dramatically accelerated now. And our expectation is that they will stay, maybe not at the levels that they are today, but much higher levels than they were 2 months ago, even when the lockdown gets taken off. So the trend is clear and has accelerated. The response across the board has been twofold. One is the existing e-commerce players, mainly the large players who are headquartered in China, but who've got operations throughout Asia, and e-commerce players in the US who operate also in other regions, have been doing a great job scaling up their own resources to deal with the surge in last mile delivery. Other players have had to get more creative, and the example you used around a taxi company doing home delivery of groceries is a great one. We're seeing that in a lot of other places. So the recommendation that we have for our clients, almost regardless of where they sit in the logistics value chain, is you need to rethink your last mile, and you need to get more creative about that. And it's part of it is responding to the demands and the opportunities that exist today. But many of these opportunities will also exist 6 months from now, 12 months from now, 2 years from now. And that doesn't mean you need to build up your own home delivery network. And there are some great opportunities to partner with some either traditional last mile delivery carriers, some non-traditional, like the example you used with taxi companies, or some emerging startups who have been focused on last mile delivery for the last number of years, but have not necessarily found the huge growth quite yet. So the flexibility around your network models on last mile delivery is going to be a really key success factor for most logistics companies going forward, even ones who've not traditionally been involved in B2C home delivery. You'll find that many more of them are getting involved right now.
I need to ask you on this one, because my impression is that most traditional 3PLs, for lack of a better word, are lagging behind when it comes to, or are doing nothing actually in a lot of cases when it comes to e-commerce, when it comes to last mile, even when it comes to on the delivery side. How do you, and there's also the reality that almost nobody has cracked the $1 million question: how do you make money out of it, right? There's very little margin in it by itself also. How do you see this moving forward? And you mentioned that some of them are going more aggressively into it. I'd love to go a little bit more deeper, and maybe with some examples of what you've seen done by 3PLs in general in going and maybe also accelerating this process of becoming more flexible and adapting their models to e-commerce.
That's a great question. We tend to see three different models that companies have followed, and some people who've been sitting on the sidelines, and I think the time for sitting on the sidelines is over. So one model is for companies, whether they're e-commerce companies or logistics companies, to invest in their own delivery networks. And obviously for the large express companies, they already have delivery networks. For other companies, they've got the opportunity to build them. Some e-commerce players have decided to build their own. Some logistics providers also have the potential to build their own, and that is a path that you need to decide on and then commit to. The second area is potentially to partner and to work with existing last mile delivery specialists. You'll see a number of those in whether it's in Asia or Europe or in the US, companies that are focused only on last mile delivery and providing those services. So traditionally, a lot of logistics companies have seen them as either competitors or something that they didn't want to deal with. We're seeing increasing talk of partnerships, and I would believe that that's going to continue beyond the current opportunity, and those will be more long-lasting partnerships going forward. Or the last one is similar, where you're working on a more technology-based, tapping into the gig economy and creating a last mile delivery network with more independent contractors. And whether you do that yourself or you partner with somebody who's got the technology to do that, but that's another approach. Or you could sit it out completely, which is probably a less desirable option, because e-commerce has traditionally been the fastest part of the fastest growing part of the logistics business, and that's only going to accelerate.
Mm. Would you see also this crisis impacting the digitalization of the logistics industry? I mean, there's been a lot of talk, digital freight forwarders, Flexport, Freight Hub, Zen Cargo, uh, Freight Toss as well. There's a few of them, right? So versus the more, let's say, the more established 3PLs. How do you see this aspect?
I fully agree. This is definitely going to accelerate the digitization or digitalization of the logistics industry. And that'll happen on multiple levels. So one, as you mentioned, these startups that have really come into being really only in the last 5 years, that will accelerate their business models. However, the incumbents have, many of them, many of the large ones have already started the process of digitalizing their own business models, and that needs to accelerate. And those that accelerate this process will likely end up being the winners several years out, whereas those who decide that this is the time to trim costs and cut back on their transformation efforts will lag behind, and will find themselves in a worse competitive position in the next number of years. I think in terms of digitalization, in the future, we're going to look back and we'll see this as an inflection point. And not that COVID-19 caused any of this, but it could be seen as the before and after, in terms of the full emotional commitment to becoming a data-driven company. And I think there's a fundamental difference in mindset between, say, the e-commerce companies or the digital freight companies that you mentioned, who view themselves as data companies supported by people, versus many of the more traditional companies see themselves as people companies supported by data and technology. And I think that paradigm needs to shift, and perhaps this is the event that shifts that mindset for a lot of people.
I'm gonna share this because you might have seen it as well. It was circulating on social media. It was a tick box question and 4 different answers, and the question was, what helped the most in the digital transformation of your company? Answer A, the CEO. Answer B, the CTO. Answer C, agile teams. Answer D, COVID-19 crisis. and with a big tick on the COVID-19 crisis. And it's without a doubt, there's the number, I mean, one of the biggest challenges that people face right now, that you don't know, where's my stuff in supply chain, where's my goods, how do I plan, how do I even make sense of my supply chain, how much should I order, how much demand do I have any demand, do I have any supply? All of this is and how do I manage my workforce on the other hand, right, which is, by the way, all of them at the office side at least working at home, and the frontliners are working in the ports, and how do I ensure their safety? So all these things, as you rightfully said, I would completely agree as well. This inflection, it's just going to accelerate the whole push for digital. And I think you cannot do it without it anyways. On this point, I wanted to ask specifically for technologies and new practices from a tech perspective that you've seen maybe deployed around these times to either give businesses visibility in their supply chain better, if you can even predictability. I don't think you can predict a lot, but in terms of what to do in this situation, have you seen any that struck you? Have there any good examples of tech being used in supply chain in this crisis that you can mention?
Well, I think overall, the technology that the e-commerce companies have put in place over the last number of years is really showing its value right now. And I think that they're the big winners out of this. And a big part was because they've got the technology to accept orders seamlessly from customers and to link that to a logistics system, either that they control or that they're tightly linked to get cost-efficient delivery to end consumers with a high level of visibility. So their technology was really made for this type of a situation. And although they'd been gaining market share for years and years and years, this is perhaps their breakthrough moment. A number of the more traditional companies are starting to look to those technologies and trying to understand in more depth, well, what is it that the e-commerce players are doing, and what is it that we can do to emulate some of that, even if we're not going to become an e-commerce player, but how do we become a technology first, data first company? And it really links to your previous point about the the tick boxes and COVID-19 being a big driver of change. The way we see it is that change management is hard. Change management is exceptionally hard when you're dealing with logistics companies who've been around for literally hundreds of years in many cases. And what times of crisis do is it unlocks at least half of the change management, which is getting people to understand that there is a strong need to change. And when the crisis unlocks that, it actually opens up possibilities for firms to do things that they knew that they needed to do, but were just too hard to do internally. And we're seeing a lot of that. We're having a lot of conversations with clients around what do you do next, and what does that look like, given that we've got the mandate for change and the openness to change from the staff that might not have existed even a couple of months ago.
This is a great point. And also as a leader, as a CEO of a company, I guess now it's a time where you need to be resilient. On one side, you need to be focused on the fundamentals, on cash flow and all of that. But at the same time, you need to balance the employees, how they're feeling, because obviously most people would feel insecure in these times. And also this type of balance is very sensitive. I guess the question is, would you have any advice, for the executives of the companies, more on the soft skills and communication, and I guess that side of how do you maintain the ship and how do you inspire and lead the people in these times?
Yeah, it's a really important point, and I think this also shows the leaders. There's a saying that character is not built in crisis, but character is revealed in times of crisis. And leadership is absolutely critical right now. We believe that a lot of responsible leadership involves two parts. It's the head and the heart, and it's understanding what needs to be done and being rational about the current situation and what plans need to be put in place and how they need to be executed, and marrying that with the human side of the equation and being able to show empathy, compassion, and caring. And ultimately it comes together in one word, I would say, and that's trust. And that senior leadership, the CEO, but also the broader leadership team needs to focus on engendering trust from their company, and the way to do that is to lead both with the rational side and explain to people what's going on and what the company is going to do in this environment, but then also lead with compassion and caring and understanding the human element and understanding how disruptive this is and stressful this is on each and every person in their sphere, because it's a double disruption. It's the disruption. It's a triple disruption. It's the disruption of their day-to-day working practices, which the employer would probably have a good understanding of. But it's also disruption in terms of their day-to-day living, working from home, with their spouse, their children, and that creates a whole new dynamic and new stressors that we need to be mindful of and empathetic about. And then there's the health crisis itself. I mean, as the numbers keep going up, more and more of us know people who are directly impacted, or are, say, frontline healthcare workers who are involved in the middle of this, and all of those things build up stress, and good leaders understand that and deal with that head on and have discussions around that. Uh, and then the last piece is you continue to follow the good practices of communication, making sure that it's frequent, making sure that it's empathetic, making sure that that people know where to go when there are issues, and that you support them when there are issues. And we'll know in hindsight the leaders and the companies that are able to execute on all of those things. It's a challenge, but we've seen many companies step up to that challenge, and that's good to see.
Mm. And I know that you have, or in doing a bit of research and preparing for the interview, we stumbled across one suggestion that you have in terms of simple and clear communication. I think you were saying about a rule of 10 times 10 times 10, and maybe you can share a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think that's a great example of best practices in communication, that you need to repeat messages in many different ways from many different sources, whether they're written, verbal, video, so that people will understand, and not just understand, but will retain it and internalize what you're trying to get across. A lot of the details will get lost, and that's okay, because people, if you've got a robust structure, people can go back and get the details. But I think the key thing is around building that trust and making sure that resonates, and that does take the repetition from many different sources in many different ways.
I must share on a personal note. I'm quite an impatient person myself, and a lot of times I find or I would love the team or our team to pick up things faster, and your this rule of saying something 10 times in 10 different ways for people to retain 10%, it really got to me, because that's when I realized, like, that's probably a much more realistic approach to much more realistic also expectations to have on the team, and also making sure that ourselves as leaders put in the effort to do it right. So I must personally thank you for that. It kind of struck somewhere a chord with me, for sure.
That's great.
So if you were to put yourself in the position, and this is kind of a summary, if you may, of all our conversation now. So if you were right now, Christopher, if you were the CEO of a global logistics company, and with all that we have discussed, but if you were to and all the clients that you're talking to, but if you were to distill it to maximum 3 things that you would focus on in terms of making sure that in 12 months the company would be in a good position to after this crisis, because hopefully in 12 months this crisis will be gone, what would those 3 things be?
That's a great question, and that's exactly what we spend most of our time doing, speaking with global CEOs and understanding what it is they need to be doing now, and more importantly, as you're asking, what do you do next? And by next, I mean you start today to be ready for the very short-term future. So the 3 things would be, number 1, accelerate your current plans. Most of these companies already had plans and initiatives in place to modernize their companies in different ways. Those are probably almost all still valid, but you need to accelerate the most important ones. And I'll give you 2 quick examples of those. One is around automation of physical processes and facilities. that is something that's been ongoing, particularly in the higher labor cost environments for quite some time. And that needs to not only continue, but it needs to accelerate as people understand that when you've got physical processes mixed with labor, and then you've got social distancing requirements, that doesn't mix. And so you don't have to go to a fully automated hub or a fully automated warehouse, but increasing the amount of automation that you do have combined with your labor force will allow you the flexibility to continue to operate in scenarios like this. And so that resilience needs to be put into your business cases around automation, and you'll find that in many cases that will push you over the edge to say, all right, well, a greater share of our facilities worldwide are amenable to automation or partial automation because of that new consideration. So there'll be a big acceleration in that. The second area of acceleration is the modernization of IT systems. Many logistics providers are still operating on very old IT systems that they are modernizing, either in in a big bang new system or in smaller incremental improvements. That needs to continue, but that needs to accelerate. I think that companies who are operating on the old systems have found that they're not quite so flexible and are really inhibiting their ability to fully work in a virtual environment. And the companies that accelerate their IT modernization will come out winners in this. Those that decide they're going to slow down or cut back on new investments, I think, are going to struggle 18, 24 months from now when they see what their competitors have done. So number one is really accelerate your current plans. Number two, and we touched on this a little bit earlier, but it's around implementing new digital ideas and frameworks. So focusing around the data first and around what data do we have, how do we decouple that from our operations, how do we link with the data that is upstream and downstream from us, and how do we actually generate value from that data and improve our operations. That it includes machine learning and dashboards, and there's lots of other things that you can do with that once you take a data focused view on the company. And that's a fundamentally different view on the company than most have. The third area, you said I have three. The third area of what people need to do next is rethink your networks, and this is absolutely critical. We already talked about the rebuilding the last mile through collaboration or other things. So I think rethinking your last mile is super important. The other area would be to adapt your network and services, not just to what the needs are today of your customers, but what are they going to look like tomorrow and the day after. And by tomorrow and the day after, I mean, when the economies come out of lockdown, how are your customers going to be gearing up their operations? And you're going to get some wild swings in demand, and the bullwhip effect all the way through the supply chain, and you need to be ready for that from a network perspective. And so working with your clients to understand what their plans are for restart is absolutely critical. And then tomorrow, in the medium term, a lot of your clients are going to be restructuring their supply chains. They will be looking at where they've got single source points of risk. They will be looking at building in flexibility into their supply chain, not just efficiency. And that means logistics providers are going to have to adapt to those new demands. And so now's the time to be anticipating those demands and to start orienting your networks around that. And then the third one, I just love to, in terms of the new network idea, the one bright spot that we're seeing is actually China. So I would say look to China. From an economy point of view, it's getting back on track. From a production point of view, it's getting back on track. They're currently suffering from lack of demand as most retail in the rest of the world is shut down. But if you just look at how they've responded to the health crisis and how they've responded to the economy, it's looking like they are going to be getting back to normal faster than anyone else. and they could potentially lead us out of the economic recovery as well. So if you're a logistics company that has exposure to China, I would say double down on China, because that's going to be your area of growth for the next little while.
Super. No, excellent points. On that note, Christopher, I want to thank you for your time. Very insightful and relevant sharing. And hopefully this crisis will be gone sooner rather than later. And for sure, lots of learnings and lots of case studies and lots of discussions in MBA classes will be done on this COVID-19 in retrospect. Thanks again for your time and for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. And just to reiterate, I think it's what logistics companies do now is going to be critical for how they come out of this in the next 2 to 5 years. So what happens in the next 6 months is pivotal to the whole industry.
For sure. Thank you, Christopher.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. If you liked what you heard, be sure to go to www.elcotglobal.com and click the podcast button for all the show notes of the interview. Also, subscribe to our mailing list to get our latest updates first. If you're listening through a streaming platform like iTunes, Spotify, or Stitcher, we would appreciate a kind review. 5-star works best to keep us going and our production team happy. And of course, share it with your friends. I'm most active on LinkedIn, so do feel free to follow me. And if you have any suggestions on what to do and who to invite next, don't hesitate to drop me a note. And if you're looking to hire top executives in supply chain or transform your business, of course, contact us as well to find out how we can help.